Now, buying in a trust seems to be very common and popular. See a lot of people on TikTok, Instagram, talking about purchasing in a trust to extend their borrowing capacity out. In theory, there are scenarios where this is true and it's something that can be extended out, but I do find that in execution, I find it's, not a lot of people can actually pull this off unless obviously you've got quite a large amount of money or a specific type of properties that you're looking at. So your accountant cannot write that letter unless it's positive, unless it's a dodgy accountant, his license is on the line, he's technically non-compliant, and that letter's non-compliant as well. So really, it is a big risk that before you go ahead and do this, you need to chat with your accountant, one, on their risk appetite, but also two, you need to look at the asset that you're going to purchase within the trust structure. And if you think it's going to be a $200,000 or $300,000, $400,000 property doing a 10 or a 5, even a 20% deposit, highly unlikely that you're going to get that letter. If you did a 50% deposit, 40% deposit, and it's genuinely positive cash flow, and that makes sense, then yes, your accountant should be able to write that letter. And if that is something that meets that lender's parameters and criterias, then that should be okay. Where we see that that does work is that if people had a property in a trust, maybe they've inherited a property portfolio or they're a beneficiary or something like that of a trust, and there's been a portfolio handed down to them that's positive cash flow, that can make sense, again, because that accountant can write that letter to cover that off. The other one would be if that property within the trust is doing Airbnb. So I've just recently spoken to a gentleman out on Hamilton Island, basically doing Airbnb, the kind of short stay rentals. Essentially made about $130,000 worth of income, and after the mortgage and expenses, that was about $90,000. So he was positive about 40K. The lender, you can easily get the accountant to write that letter because that's clearly positive, and that clearly could be excluded from serviceability because it's covering its own expenses. So that's one area where we have seen that work. Obviously, if clients come to me and the accountant's letters are there and we obviously look at the financials and it matches up, obviously we can look at those lenders that take it away from serviceability. But it's something that when we're starting out, unless you've got an absolute bucket load of cash, I just don't really see this strategy work, because a lot of people think, I'll do a 10% deposit, I put it in a trust, it's excluded from my serviceability. I go and pay a couple of $1,000s to get it set up. Obviously, because you're purchasing in a trust, some lenders may have a high interest premium. You're paying 8%. To buy that in the trust is obviously less flexible terms. And then they go to get the letter to their next property, and the accountant's like, I'm not writing you this letter. And they're like, oh, well, I bought this in a trust. But I'm like, well, if you don't have the letter, if you can't get that, then obviously that comes out of your serviceability, and the banks need to look at that. So rather than you going through the process and spending a couple of $1,000s and being told by your accountant, oh yeah, we can do all these weird and wonderful things, you really need to check and make sure that it is going to be compliant and it is going to meet those criteria. Because if your accountant can't write the letter, then this notion of thinking you can extend your borrowing capacity is not going to work.